3 years of silence ended with the scratch of a cheap fountain pen. That was all it took for Lucas Harrington to sign away the best thing that ever happened to him. Believing he was discarding a burden, his mother laughed as the ink dried, calling his wife a gold-digging waitress who would be on the streets by morning. They thought the divorce was their victory. They thought they were stripping her of the Harrington fortune. But they had no idea that the woman standing quietly in the corner didn't need their money. In fact, she could have bought their entire legacy with her pocket change. This is the story of how the Harrington family lost everything by underestimating the quiet woman at the head of the table. The atmosphere inside the Harrington estate in upscale Greenwich, Connecticut, was always cold, regardless of the season. The air conditioning was kept at a crisp 68 degrees to preserve the antique tapestries. But the chill that permeated the dining room on this particular Tuesday had nothing to do with the thermostat. Lucas Harrington sat at the head of the mahogany table, swirling the ice in his scotch. He was a handsome man, with the kind of jawline that suggested strength, but eyes that betrayed a lifelong dependency on approval. Across from him sat his mother, Beatrice Harrington, a woman whose pearls were real but whose smile was entirely synthetic. And then there was Eliana. Eliana sat to Lucas's right, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple navy dress she had bought off the rack at a department store 3 years ago. It was clean, pressed, and entirely offensive to Beatrice. "Lucas," Beatrice said, slicing into her medium-rare filet mignon with surgical precision. "I spoke to the board today. The merger with Oakhaven Textiles is proceeding, but there are concerns about no image." Lucas took a long sip of his drink. "What kind of concerns?" "Mother." "Stability," Beatrice said, her eyes flickering toward Eliana as if she were a stain on the tablecloth. "The shareholders want to ensure the Harrington name is associated with prestige, excellence. They feel that your current domestic arrangement doesn't project the power required for the CEO position." Eliana didn't flinch. She was used to this. For 3 years, she had been the invisible woman. She cooked meals the chef refused to make. She organized Lucas's chaotic schedule, and she listened to his late-night anxieties about living up to his father's legacy. In return, she was treated like a squatter in a palace. "I'm sitting right here, Beatrice," Eliana said softly. Her voice was calm, possessed of a timbre that usually commanded attention. But in this house, it was wind against stone. Beatrice laughed, a brittle, tinkling sound. "I know you are, dear. That is precisely the problem. Look at you. You're wearing polyester." "It's cotton blend," Eliana corrected, reaching for her water glass. "It's poverty," Beatrice snapped. Dropping the facade of politeness, she turned her gaze back to her son. "Lucas, we have discussed this. The Oakhaven deal is worth $40 million. The CEO of Oakhaven, Jonathan Pierce, is bringing his daughter, Sophia, to the gala next weekend. Sophia went to Sorbonne. She speaks 4 languages. She understands our world." "And I don't?" Eliana asked, looking at her husband. She needed him to defend her. Just once. She needed him to say that she had supported him when he was depressed, that she had managed the household budget when the trust fund was temporarily frozen, that she loved him. Lucas looked at his wife. He saw the fraying hem of her sleeve. He saw the lack of jewelry. She refused to wear the gaudy Harrington heirlooms. He saw a woman who, in his mind, represented the time he tried to be normal and rebel against his mother. That rebellion was over. "Eliana," Lucas said, his voice thick with liquid courage, "Mother has a point. The business is at a critical juncture. We need to be strategic." Eliana felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. It wasn't fear. It was the heavy, dull realization that she had wasted 3 years on a man who was essentially a puppet. "Strategic," Eliana repeated. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Beatrice wiped her mouth with a linen napkin. "Let's stop dancing around it. Lucas has the papers in his study. We've been generous. Eliana, remarkably generous. Considering you came into this marriage with nothing but a suitcase full of rags and a suspicious lack of history." It was true that Eliana's history was a blank slate to them. When she met Lucas, she had been working as a consultant in New York, living quietly in a small Brooklyn apartment. She had introduced herself simply as Eliana. She never mentioned her family in Italy. She never mentioned the trust. She wanted to be loved for herself, not the empire she was destined to inherit. "You want a divorce?" Eliana stated. "It wasn't a question. I want my son to have a future," Beatrice corrected. "And unfortunately, you are an anchor, a very heavy, very dull anchor." Lucas finally looked at her, his eyes pleading for forgiveness while his mouth delivered the killing blow. "I think it's best. Eliana, we're just different. Sophie understands the pressure I'm under. She can help me navigate the social circles. You've always hated the galas. I hated the hypocrisy. Lucas, there is a difference." Eliana stood up. She didn't slam the table. She didn't cry. She simply stood, smoothing the skirt of her navy dress. "If you want me to leave, I will leave." "We prepared a settlement," Beatrice said quickly, sliding a manila envelope across the polished wood. $50,000. It's more than you'd make in 5 years waiting tables or whatever it is you people do. But there is a condition. You sign a non-disclosure agreement. You never speak to the press about the Harringtons. You disappear." Eliana looked at the envelope. $50,000. It was an insulting sum for a divorce settlement in this tax bracket. But the irony was almost delicious. She spent $50,000 on fuel for her private jet in a single month. "I don't want your money," Eliana said, pushing the envelope back. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "Don't play the martyr. You need this money." "I really don't," Eliana said. She looked at Lucas one last time. "Are you sure about this?" "Lucas, once I walk out that door, I am not coming back, no matter what happens to the company, no matter how bad things get." Lucas scoffed, a sound of genuine disbelief. "How bad things get, Eliana? We are Harringtons. We own half the textile industry in New England. We'll be fine. You're the one who needs to worry about rent." "Very well," Eliana said. "I'll sign the papers in the morning. I'll pack my things tonight." "See that you do," Beatrice said, already signaling the butler to clear the table. "And check her bags. Charles, make sure she doesn't take the silver." Eliana turned and walked out of the dining room. As she crossed the marble foyer, she heard Lucas and Beatrice laughing. It was a sound of relief, the sound of people who thought they had taken out the trash. Eliana climbed the stairs to the guest room she had been sleeping in for the past month. She pulled out her phone. It was an old model she used around them to maintain the illusion. She powered it down and reached into the hidden lining of her suitcase, pulling out a sleek, satellite-secure smartphone. She dialed a number. "Ms. D'Amato." A deep voice answered instantly. "We didn't expect to hear from you until next week." "Plans have changed, Arthur," Eliana said, her voice shifting. Gone was the submissive housewife. In her place was the tone that had terrified board members in Tokyo, London, and Dubai. Initiate the extraction protocol. I'm leaving Greenwich. And the husband? Arthur asked. Ex-husband, Eliana corrected. He chose his path. Have the car waiting at the service entrance in 1 hour. And Arthur. Yes, ma'am. Prepare the acquisition file for Harrington Textiles. I have a feeling they're going to be on the market sooner than they think. The next morning, the sun struggled to break through the grey overcast of the Connecticut sky. Inside the library of the Harrington estate, the family lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson, who smelled of stale tobacco and moral flexibility, laid the documents out on the desk. Lucas sat in the leather armchair, looking hungover. Sophie Laurent, the woman who was effectively replacing Eliana, was already there, perched on the arm of Lucas's chair. She was blonde, vivacious, and wearing a diamond bracelet that looked suspiciously like one Eliana had seen in Beatrice's jewelry box. Standard procedure, Henderson grunted. She signs. She waives spousal support in exchange for the lump sum, and the marriage is dissolved. Eliana walked in. She was dressed in jeans and a black turtleneck. She carried a single duffel bag. Finally, Sophie sighed, checking her watch. We have a brunch reservation at the club. Lucas, make it quick. Eliana ignored her. She walked to the desk and picked up the pen. She didn't read the papers. She already knew what they said. They were standard boilerplate agreements designed to crush someone who couldn't afford a lawyer. There is one change, Eliana said, pausing with the pen hovering over the signature line. No changes. Beatrice barked from the doorway. Take the deal or we drag this out in court until you starve. I'm not asking for more money, Eliana said calmly. I'm adding a clause. Complete severance of financial ties. Meaning, I don't get your money, but you also have zero claim on any assets I may possess or acquire immediately following the divorce. Henderson chuckled, a wet, rasping sound. Mrs. Harrington, with all due respect, we know you have no assets. If you win the lottery tomorrow, we don't care. We just want to ensure you don't come back claiming Lucas owes you for emotional distress. So you agree? Eliana pressed. A complete two-way financial wall. Let her write it in, Lucas said, rubbing his temples. Who cares? She owns a 2015 Honda and a box of books. Let her protect her millions. The room erupted in laughter. Sophie giggled, nuzzling into Lucas's neck. Oh, you're so funny, darling. Eliana handwrote the clause into the margin. She initialed it. Then she signed the main document, Eliana D. Harrington. Done, she said, dropping the pen. Good, Beatrice said. Now, Charles will escort you to the gate. I don't want you loitering on the driveway waiting for an Uber. Eliana picked up her bag. That won't be necessary. She walked to the front door, the heavy oak swinging open to reveal the circular driveway. Lucas, curious despite himself, followed her out, with Sophie and Beatrice trailing behind. They wanted to savor the moment of her humiliation. They expected to see a taxi. Instead, a convoy of 3 black SUVs was idling in the driveway. They were massive, armored vehicles with diplomatic plates. Men in dark suits and earpieces stood by the doors, scanning the perimeter with professional intensity. As Eliana stepped onto the porch, the lead driver, a man built like a tank, stepped forward and bowed his head slightly. Ms. D'Amato, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. We have the jet fueled at Titoboro. We can be in Milan by dinner. Lucas froze. Ms. D'Amato. Eliana stopped on the bottom step. She turned back to look at the trio standing in the doorway of the fading mansion. D'Amato, Beatrice whispered, the colour draining from her face. As in D'Amato Global. The D'Amato family was not just rich, they were industrial royalty. They owned shipping lines, pharmaceutical patents, and a significant portion of the European logistics grid. They were the kind of money that made the Harringtons look like they were playing with Monopoly cash. Eliana looked at Lucas. Her expression was unreadable. I told you, Lucas, I didn't want your money. I just wanted a husband who believed in me. Eliana. Lucas stepped forward, his confusion warring with a sudden, sharp panic. What is this? Whose cars are these? Mine. Eliana said simply. She signaled to the driver. He opened the rear door of the middle SUV. The interior was cream leather, and Lucas caught a glimpse of a laptop screen displaying a live stock ticker. Wait. Lucas ran down the steps. You lied to me. You pretended to be poor. I never said I was poor, Eliana replied, pausing with one hand on the car door. I said I was a consultant, which I am. I consult for my own board of directors, and I never lied. Lucas, I omitted. I wanted to see if you loved me, or the lifestyle I could provide. I got my answer today. But the $50,000, Beatrice stammered from the porch, clutching her pearls for real this time. You signed the waiver. I did. Eliana smiled, and for the first time, it was a shark's smile. And you signed the clause, complete severance of financial ties. You have no claim on D'Amato assets, and more importantly, I have no obligation to bail you out when the market shifts. What does that mean? Sophie asked, her voice shrill. It means, Eliana said, sliding into the car, that winter is coming for Harrington Textiles, and I won't be there to keep you warm. The heavy door slammed shut with a vault-like thud. The convoy moved out, gravel crunching under the reinforced tires, leaving Lucas Harrington standing in his driveway, watching the tail lights disappear, realizing he had just divorced a woman worth more than the GDP of a small country. 6 months had passed since the divorce. For the first 3, Lucas managed to convince himself it was a hallucination. Eliana couldn't be that D'Amato. Maybe she was a distant cousin. Maybe she was a high-end assistant who had borrowed the cars, but reality has a way of asserting itself. He saw her face on the cover of Forbes 3 weeks later. The headline read, "The Silent Titan, Eliana D'Amato, returns as CEO of Apex Maritime." The article detailed her 2-year sabbatical, during which she lived undercover to understand the American consumer market. It mentioned her ex-husband only once, in a single, devastating sentence. Ms. D'Amato recently severed ties with her American partner to focus fully on the expansion of the Apex fleet. Meanwhile, the Harrington household was crumbling. The Oakhaven deal that Beatrice had pushed for had turned out to be a disaster. Oakhaven's books were cooked. They were drowning in debt, and by merging, Harrington Textiles had absorbed that toxic debt. Lucas sat in his office, staring at a spreadsheet that was bleeding red ink. "We missed the shipment to Bangladesh," his production manager said, pacing the room. "The cotton is sitting in the port in Savannahs. The logistics company refused to load it. Why?" Lucas snapped. "We have a contract. We had a contract with a subsidiary. That subsidiary was just acquired. Acquired by whom?" The manager hesitated. "Apex Maritime, sir." Lucas closed his eyes. "Apex. Eliana." "Get me another shipper," Lucas ordered. "I can't." Apex bought the 3 major regional carriers last month. They control the Atlantic routes now. If we want to move that cotton, we have to go through them. And they've flagged our account. Flagged it for what? Credit risk. The intercom buzzed. It was his secretary, her voice trembling. Mr. Harrington, the bank is on line 1. They're calling about the credit line renewal. Lucas picked up the phone. This is Lucas. Mr. Harrington, the banker said, his tone icy. We've reviewed the quarterly financials for Harrington Textiles. Given the Oakhaven losses, we cannot renew your revolving credit facility. You can't do that, Lucas said, standing up. We've been with your bank for 50 years. My father built this relationship. And your father is gone, the banker said. The risk profile has changed. Unless you can secure a guarantor with significant liquid assets, say, in the range of 200 million, we will have to call in the loans by the end of the month. Lucas dropped the phone. 200 million. They didn't have it. They had real estate. They had inventory, but they didn't have cash. They were asset-rich and cash-poor, the classic death spiral of old money. That night, dinner at the manor was a funeral. Beatrice was drinking gin, something she usually forbade. Sophie was scrolling through Instagram, looking bored. The spark between her and Lucas had died the moment the credit card started getting declined. We're going to lose the house, Lucas said into the silence. Don't be dramatic, Beatrice slurred. I'm not being dramatic. Mother, the bank is pulling the plug. We can't move product because Apex has a stranglehold on shipping, and we can't pay the loans because we can't move product. Sophie looked up. Apex isn't that Eliana's company. The name hung in the air like toxic gas. Yes, Lucas said. Well, Sophie shrugged. Just call her. Tell her you're sorry. Ask her to unblock the account. It's not that simple. Sophie, Lucas snapped. I humiliated her. We kicked her out. So what? Sophie rolled her eyes. She was your wife. She probably still loves you. Women like that. They're emotional. Just go there. Look sad. Remind her of the good times. She'll cave. Rich women always want to save the broken puppy. Beatrice slammed her glass down. She's right. You have to go to her. Lucas. Mother. You called her a peasant to her face. And now I'm acknowledging she is a powerhouse, Beatrice said. Pragmatism overriding pride. Go to New York. She's at the Apex headquarters. Get a meeting. Beg if you have to. But do not come back until those ships are moving. Lucas looked at the women in his life, one who viewed him as a meal ticket, and one who viewed him as a legacy prop. He realized, with a sickening jolt, that Eliana was the only person who had ever looked at him and just seen Lucas. I'll go, Lucas said quietly. But I don't think she's going to cave. The Apex Maritime headquarters in Manhattan was a jagged shard of glass piercing the sky near Hudson Yards. It screamed power. It screamed the future. Lucas Harrington walked into the lobby wearing his best suit, but he felt like he was wearing a clown costume. The lobby was a hive of activity tech bros, serious men in Italian suits, and young prodigies carrying tablets. He approached the reception desk, a sleek, minimalist slab of marble. I'm here to see Eliana D'Amato, Lucas said. The receptionist, a young man with sharp glasses, didn't even look up from his screen. Do you have an appointment? No, but tell her it's Lucas Harrington, her husband. The receptionist finally looked up. He tapped a few keys. Ex-husband, according to the file. Lucas flushed. Just tell her I'm here. It's urgent. It involves Harrington Textiles. Ms. D'Amato is in meetings all day. I can fit you in. 3 weeks from next Tuesday. For 15 minutes. I don't have 3 weeks. Lucas slammed his hand on the desk, causing security guards near the elevators to turn. My company will be dead in 3 weeks. Tell her I'm not leaving until I see her. The receptionist stared at him calmly. Sir, if you cause a scene, you will be removed. However, D'Amato did leave a standing instruction for a Mr. Harrington. She did. Lucas felt a surge of hope. Yeah, she said, if you ever showed up begging, you were to be allowed to wait. In holding room B? Fine, take me there. Holding room B turned out to be a glass box on the 41st floor. It had a single chair, a table, and a view of the city that was breathtakingly indifferent to his suffering. Lucas waited. He waited for an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours. He watched the sun go down over New Jersey. He watched the lights of the city flicker on. He was hungry, thirsty, and his resolve was crumbling. At 8:30 p.m., the door hissed open. Lucas jumped up, straightening his tie. Eliana walked in. She was unrecognizable from the woman who used to darn his socks. She wore a white power suit that looked like it cost more than his car. Her hair was cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob. Her makeup was flawless, highlighting the dangerous intelligence in her eyes. She was flanked by 2 assistants and Arthur. The man from the phone. She didn't sit. She stood at the other end of the table, looking at him as if he were a specimen in a jar. You look tired. Lucas, she said. Her voice was cool, stripped of any warmth. Eliana. Lucas breathed. You look incredible. I look like myself, she countered. Something you never bothered to see. You have 5 minutes. I have a dinner with the Prime Minister of Japan. Lucas swallowed hard. Eliana, I made a mistake. You made several. Be specific. I shouldn't have let my mother treat you that way. I shouldn't have signed the papers. You signed them because you thought I was a liability, Eliana said, checking her watch. You thought I was dragging you down. Now you're here because the bank is calling in your loans and my ships aren't moving your cotton. How do you know about the bank? Eliana smiled. I own the bank. Lucas, D'Amato Holdings, acquired a controlling stake in First Connecticut Bank last week. Lucas felt his knees give way. He sank into the chair. You bought my bank. I bought a portfolio of distressed regional banks. Yours just happened to be in the basket. It's business. Lucas, not personal. Not personal. Lucas laughed, a hysterical edge to his voice. You're destroying my family. Your family destroyed itself, Eliana said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. You leveraged your assets to impress a board that doesn't respect you. You married a woman, me, and treated her like a servant. Then you traded me for a younger model who spent your operating capital on vacations. I didn't destroy you, Lucas. I just stopped propping you up. Please, Lucas whispered. I'll do anything. Beatrice. She's sick with worry. The employees. We have 500 workers. Eliana's face softened. Just a fraction. The workers? Yes, that is the only reason I let you up here. She snapped her fingers. Arthur slid a document across the table. This is a term sheet, Eliana said. Apex Maritime will acquire Harrington Textiles. We will pay off the debt. We will keep the factory open. We will save the jobs of those 500 people. Lucas looked at the document. It was a lifeline. Thank you, he said, tears pricking his eyes. Thank you, Eliana. I knew you still cared. Read the conditions. Lucas, she said coldly. Lucas looked down at the bold text. Condition 1. The immediate resignation of Lucas Harrington and Beatrice Harrington from the board of directors. Condition 2. The removal of the Harrington name from the company. It will be rebranded as Apex Textiles. Condition 3. All equity held by the Harrington family is surrendered for a nominal fee of $1. $1? Lucas gasped. You're stealing my company. I'm buying a corpse, Eliana corrected. The company is bankrupt. It has zero value. I'm paying off the debts, which is a $40 million favor. In exchange, you and your toxic mother leave forever. I can't sign this, Lucas said, shaking. It's my legacy. Then keep your legacy, Eliana said, turning to the door. And explain to the bankruptcy court next week why you lost everything. You have 24 hours to decide. She walked out. The door hissed shut. Lucas was left alone in the glass box, staring at the paper that represented the end of his world, signed by the woman he had thrown away. The drive back to Greenwich from Manhattan usually took an hour, but for Lucas Harrington, it felt like a descent into purgatory. The document Eliana had given him the term sheet that would strip him of his title. His company and his dignity sat on the passenger seat of his sedan like a loaded gun. When he pulled through the wrought iron gates of the Harrington estate, the first thing he noticed was the silence. Usually, the groundskeepers were busy manicuring the hedges or the fountains were running. Today, the estate was still. The landscaping service had cancelled their contract that morning due to non-payment. He found Beatrice in the solarium, surrounded by boxes. She wasn't packing, she was drinking. A bottle of vintage brandy, one of the last from his father's collection, sat empty on the glass table. Did you fix it? Beatrice asked, her voice slurred. She didn't look at him. She was staring out at the overgrown rose garden. Did you tell that Italian girl her place? Lucas dropped the term sheet on the table. I fixed it, Mother. But not the way you think. Beatrice picked up the paper, squinting at the fine print. Her hands shook, causing the paper to rattle. As she read, her face went from flushed to an ashy grey. $1, she whispered. She wants to buy 50 years of history for $1. It's not a sale, Mother. It's a mercy killing, Lucas said, pouring himself a drink. We have 48 hours to vacate the premises. The house was cross-collateralized with the business loans. I didn't know until the bank manager told me. You signed the papers 3 years ago to fund the expansion. I thought the market would turn, Beatrice stammered. I did it for the family. Well, the family is homeless, Lucas said brutally. Eliana is paying off the business debt so we don't go to prison for trading while insolvent. But she's taking the house, the cars, the factory, everything. We leave with our clothes and whatever cash is in our pockets. Just then, the sound of high heels clicking rapidly on the marble floor echoed from the hallway. Sophie appeared in the doorway, dragging 2 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases. She was dressed for travel oversized sunglasses, a trench coat, and a look of sheer determination. Sophie, Lucas asked. Stepping forward, where are you going? Sophie didn't stop. She signaled to a private car driver who was waiting by the front door, a driver Lucas didn't recognize. I'm leaving. Lucas, she said, checking her reflection in the hall mirror. My father called. He heard about the Apex takeover. He says you're radioactive. But we're in this together, Lucas pleaded, reaching for her arm. I need you. We can start over. I have a degree. I can get a job. Sophie laughed, pulling her arm away with a look of genuine disgust. A job, Lucas? You've never worked a day in your life. You sat in a chair your daddy bought. And frankly, without the money, you're just a depressed man with mother issues. I'm going to Saint-Tropez. Jonathan Pierce has a villa there. Jonathan Pierce. Lucas felt the room spin. The CEO of Oakhaven. The man who ruined my company. He didn't ruin it, darling. He outsmarted you. And he's much, much richer. Sophie blew him a kiss. Goodbye, Lucas. Don't call me. The heavy front door slammed shut. The silence returned, heavier than before. Lucas looked at his mother. The matriarch of Greenwich society was weeping silently, clutching the term sheet. Sign it, Lucas said, his voice hollow. Sign the paper. Mother, it's over. With a trembling hand, Beatrice Harrington signed away the empire. Lucas added his signature below hers. He took a picture of the document and emailed it to Arthur. 3 minutes later, his phone buzzed. A notification from the bank. Transfer received $1 from Apex Maritime Holdings. Status account closed. Pack your things, Mother, Lucas said, loosening his tie. We have to be out by noon tomorrow. The destruction of the Harrington legacy didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened on a rainy Tuesday morning with a blowtorch. Sparks cascaded down like orange rain as the ironworkers cut through the bolts, holding the massive gold leaf sign that had loomed over the factory gates for 50 years. Harrington Textiles, the letters, once a symbol of unshakable dominance in Connecticut, groaned as they were pulled free, crashing into the dumpster below with a hollow, metallic clang. In their place, a new structure rose. It was sleek, minimalist, and imposing Apex Sustainable Fabrics, a division of D'Amato Global. Eliana arrived at the facility just as the last bolt was tightened. She didn't arrive in the convoy of armored SUVs that had extracted her from the estate. There were no sirens, no fanfare. She drove herself in a modest, charcoal-grey electric sedan, the tires humming quietly on the wet asphalt as she pulled into the general parking lot, bypassing the reserved executive spaces. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with a terror that tasted like copper. 500 employees, weavers, dyers, loom mechanics, and floor managers were gathered in the main production bay. The machines were silent for the first time in years, rendering the cavernous space echoing and cold. The rumor mill had been churning all morning. Takeover, asset stripping, liquidation. They stood in hushed, tight clusters, clutching their hard hats like shields. They knew what happened when big conglomerates swallowed failing family businesses. The workers were the first to bleed. She's here, whispered Old Man Miller, the floor foreman who had given 40 years of his life to the looms. His knuckles were white as he gripped the railing of the walkway. Lucas's wife, the quiet one. She's not the quiet one anymore, muttered Sarah, a young weaver standing beside him. She's the executioner. Eliana walked onto the steel gantry overlooking the factory floor. The click of her heels was the only sound in the vast room. She wore a hard hat and a high-visibility vest over her tailored suit, a visual signal that she wasn't there to observe. She was there to work. She tapped the microphone. The feedback squeal cut through the tension, making a few people jump. "Good morning," Eliana said. Her voice wasn't the imperious boom of a CEO delivering bad news. It was warm, steady, and terrifyingly calm. I know what you're thinking. You're looking at the new sign outside. And you're thinking about your mortgages. You're thinking about your children's tuition. You've heard the stories about corporate raiders who strip the copper from the walls and sell the machines for scrap. She paused, leaning against the railing, looking down at the sea of frightened faces. She let the silence stretch, acknowledging their fear rather than dismissing it. "This factory is not closing," Eliana announced, her voice ringing off the steel beams. "In fact, effective immediately, we are doubling our production capacity." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Miller's eyes widened. "However," Eliana continued, pacing slowly along the gantry, "we are done with the past. We are no longer producing cheap, synthetic blends for fast fashion brands that end up in landfills. Starting Monday, this facility will pivot entirely. We will produce high-grade, sustainable bamboo and organic cotton textiles for the luxury market. D'Amato Global has already secured exclusive contracts with 3 of the largest fashion houses in Milan and Paris. You won't be making rags anymore. You'll be making art." She descended the metal stairs, walking directly into the crowd. The workers parted for her like the Red Sea. Eyeing her with a mixture of awe and suspicion, she stopped in front of Miller. She remembered him. She remembered that he took his coffee black and that his wife, Martha, had chronic arthritis. "But there is one more thing," Eliana said, raising her voice so the back rows could hear. "During the audit of the Harrington books, I discovered irregularities." The tension snapped back, tighter than before. "The previous management, my former husband and his mother, mismanaged your pension fund," Eliana said, her voice hardening with a cold fury. "To cover their operating losses over the last 3 years, they borrowed against your futures. The fund was effectively insolvent." Angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. Miller's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "They stole our money after 40 years. They gambled it," Eliana corrected gently. "And they lost." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded document. "But D'Amato Global does not operate that way. I have liquidated the personal assets of the Harrington estate, the mansion, the art collection, the vintage cars, it's all gone. The proceeds, combined with a capital injection from Apex, have been deposited into your accounts this morning. Your pensions are fully restored, with interest." For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. The reality of her words took a moment to sink in. They weren't just keeping their jobs. They had been pulled back from the brink of financial ruin by the woman they had ignored for years. Miller stepped forward, his eyes wet. He forgot the protocol. He forgot she was a billionaire. He just saw Ellie, the girl who used to bring sandwiches to the night shift when Lucas was too busy drinking at the club. He wrapped her in a bear hug, his grease-stained coveralls pressing against her expensive jacket. Eliana didn't flinch. She hugged him back, fierce and tight. "Get to work, Miller," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We have a deadline." While Eliana was resurrecting the town, Lucas and Beatrice Harrington were learning the brutal arithmetic of survival. They had been evicted from the Greenwich estate with exactly what they could carry. The Bridgeport apartment, as Lucas called it with grim irony, was a third-floor walk-up in a neighborhood where the police sirens were a nightly lullaby. The walls were thin, smelling permanently of damp plaster and the boiled cabbage from the neighbor's unit. Beatrice refused to leave her bedroom. The space was barely large enough for a twin bed, but she treated it like a royal chamber in exile. She spent her days lying in the dark, clutching a bottle of cheap gin, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. "Lucas," she screeched from behind the closed door. "Lucas, ring for Charles. The tea is cold." Lucas sat at the wobbly laminate kitchen table, his head in his hands. "There is no Charles! Mother!" he shouted back, his voice hoarse. "There is no tea. There is only tap water." He looked down at his phone. His bank balance glared back at him, $412. It had been 3 weeks. The $6,000 he had managed to squirrel away was evaporating. First month's rent, a security deposit, and the moving van had taken half. Beatrice's blood pressure medication, which she now had to pay for out of pocket, was astronomically expensive. He needed a job. He adjusted his tie in the reflection of the microwave door. It was a Hermes tie, one of the few relics he had saved. It looked ridiculous against his frayed collar. "I'm going out," Lucas yelled to the closed bedroom door. "I'm getting a job. Don't take anything less than vice president." Beatrice slurred in response. Lucas walked out, slamming the door on her delusions. He drove his rental car, a dented sedan that smelled of stale smoke, to a luxury car dealership on the Strip. He figured he knew cars. He had owned Ferraris, Aston Martins, Bentleys. Selling them should be easy. The manager, a man named Mike with a bad spray tan and teeth that were too white, looked at Lucas's resume and then at Lucas. "Harrington," Mike said, chewing a piece of gum loudly, "as in the textile mill." "I served on the board," Lucas said, trying to project confidence. "I have extensive experience with luxury assets." "Yeah, I read the papers," Mike chuckled, tossing the resume onto a pile of trash. "Your wife, sorry. Ex-wife is turning that place into a gold mine. Says here she raised wages by 20%. That's some woman." "I'm not here to talk about my ex-wife," Lucas said stiffly. "I'm here to sell cars." Mike leaned back, his eyes cold. "Look, buddy, I can't hire you. Why not? I know the inventory better than your staff." "Because you're bad luck," Mike said bluntly. "You took a legacy business and drove it into the ground in 3 years. You have the anti-Midas touch. Everything you touch turns to dust. I can't have that energy on my lot." I need this," Lucas stammered, his pride crumbling. "My mother is sick. We're all sick of something. Pal, try Uber." Lucas walked out into the harsh afternoon sunlight, feeling the shame burn his skin. He sat in his car and wept. He cried until his throat hurt, mourning not the money, but the man he thought he was. He realized then that he had never actually done anything. He was a Harrington. That was a label, not a skill. Desperation has a way of clarifying things. It strips away the ego until only survival remains. 2 hours later, Lucas pulled up to the gates of the Apex factory. The new signage gleamed in the twilight. The security guards were new, serious men with earpieces, not the old gatekeepers who used to wave him through. "I need to see her," Lucas told the guard. "Please." "Ms. D'Amato is in meetings," the guard said, his hand resting near his belt. "Tell her it's Lucas. Tell her." Lucas swallowed the bile in his throat. "Tell her I'm hungry." He wasn't escorted to the executive suite. He was taken to the employee cafeteria. It was 6:00 p.m., and the dinner rush was starting. Workers he vaguely recognized were eating pot roast and laughing. They went silent when they saw him, their eyes tracking him with a mix of pity and contempt. Eliana was sitting at a corner table, alone, reading a report on a tablet. She looked radiant, energized by the very work that had exhausted him. She didn't look up as he approached. "Sit," she said. Lucas sat. He kept his hands in his lap to hide the shaking. "Eliana, you look incredible. If you are here for money, the answer is no," she said, finally raising her eyes. They were dark, unreadable pools. "I gave you a clean slate. Lucas, I paid off $40 million of your debt. That was the settlement." "I know," Lucas whispered. "I didn't come for a handout. I came for a job." Eliana raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "A job here." "I know the machines," Lucas said, grasping at straws. "I know the suppliers. I can be a shift manager. I can help with the transition." Eliana sighed, putting down her tablet. "Lucas, look around. These people respect me because I saved them. They tolerate you because you left. If I put you in charge of a shift, there would be a riot. You have no respect here. You haven't earned it." "I'll earn it." Lucas leaned forward. "Please, Eliana, Beatrice she's losing her mind. We have nothing. I need insurance. I need dignity." Eliana studied him for a long moment. She looked for the arrogance, the entitlement that had defined him for their entire marriage. She saw only fear. She saw a man who had finally hit the bottom of the well and realized no one was throwing down a rope. "You want dignity?" Eliana asked softly. "Dignity comes from labor, Lucas, not from a title." "I'll do anything," he said. "We have an opening," Eliana said, "but not in management." She slid a plastic badge across the table. It wasn't the gold access card he used to carry. It was plain white. "The night shift cleaning crew is short a man," Eliana said. "It pays $20 an hour. Full benefits, medical, dental, vision. But the work is hard. You'll be scrubbing the dye vats. You'll be sweeping the lint from under the looms. You'll be cleaning the toilets used by the men you once thought you were better than." Lucas stared at the badge. Lucas Harrington. Environmental Services. Janitor. Lucas choked out. "You want me to be a janitor in my father's factory?" "It's not your father's factory anymore," Eliana said, her voice sharp as glass. "It's mine. And the floors are dirty. Do you want the job, or should I call security to escort you out?" Lucas looked at the badge. He thought of Beatrice staring at the ceiling. He thought of the empty bank account. He thought of the humiliating laughter of the car dealer. He reached out and took the badge. His fingers brushed against the plastic, sealing his fate. "I'll take it," Lucas said. His voice was quiet. But for the first time in his life, it was steady. "Shift starts at 10 p.m., Eliana said, returning to her tablet. "Don't be late. And Lucas..." He paused, half standing. "Yes, get a haircut," she said, not looking up. "You look like a mess." Lucas walked out of the cafeteria, the badge clutching in his hand like a lifeline, ready to scrub the floors of the empire he had lost. 5 years later, the night of the Businesswoman of the Decade gala, New York City felt electric, charged with the kind of frantic energy that only money and power could generate. The event was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a venue reserved for the gods of industry and culture. Outside, a phalanx of photographers swarmed against the velvet ropes, their flashes popping in a blinding staccato rhythm, screaming names into the cool autumn air. Inside, the Temple of Denda was transformed. The ancient sandstone, usually stark and imposing, was bathed in a soft, golden light that made the guests look like deities descending from Olympus. Waiters moved like ghosts through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a month. The air smelled of expensive perfume, old money, and the sharp, metallic tang of ambition. At the center of this swirling galaxy was Eliana D'Amato. She stood near the reflecting pool, a vision in silver. Her gown was made of Apex silk, a fabric her company had engineered to be lighter than air but stronger than steel, shimmering like liquid moonlight with every breath she took. She was laughing with the governor of New York, her head thrown back in genuine amusement, looking every inch the titan she had become. In 5 years, Apex Maritime had swallowed its competitors to become the largest logistics company in the Western Hemisphere, and Apex Textiles had revolutionized the fashion industry, turning sustainability into the ultimate luxury. Eliana was no longer just a participant in this world. She was its architect, miles away. In a cramped but tidy townhouse in New Haven, the atmosphere was very different. Lucas Harrington sat in a worn recliner that he had bought second-hand. The living room was small, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and the pot roast he had slow-cooked for dinner. The walls were bare, save for a few framed photos of the factory crewmen and women in hard hats, grinning with grease-smeared faces. He was 40 years old now, though the mirror often showed a man who looked 50. His hair, once thick and perfectly styled by the most expensive barbers in Greenwich, was greying at the temples and cut short for practicality. His hands, which had once held nothing heavier than a crystal tumbler or a fountain pen, were now rough, scarred, and perpetually stained with engine oil. Lucas picked up the remote and turned up the volume on the small television set. The gala was being broadcast live, a window into a life that felt like a fever dream from another existence. He watched the camera pan across the room, catching glimpses of faces he used to know. There was Jonathan Pierce, looking older and more tired. There was the banker who had foreclosed on the Harrington estate, now looking nervous as he tried to catch Eliana's eye. And then, the camera found her. The reporter, a young woman with hungry eyes, thrust a microphone toward Eliana. "Ms. D'Amato, Miss D'Amato, over here." Eliana turned, her expression composed, the mask of the CEO slipping into place with practiced ease. "You've built an empire from the ashes of a traditional industry," the reporter shouted over the din. "What is your secret? What drives you to work 18-hour days when you could retire to an island tomorrow?" Eliana looked directly into the camera lens for a heart-stopping second. Lucas felt the breath catch in his throat. It felt as though she was looking right through the screen, past the glitter and the noise, straight into his quiet living room. "I learned a valuable lesson once," Eliana said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the background chatter. "I learned that value isn't about the name on the building. It's about the foundation. You can inherit a castle, but if you don't know how to lay bricks, it will fall on your head. I build things that last, because I know what it's like to be underestimated. I know what it's like to be invisible." The reporter pressed on. "Sensing a scoop? And your personal life? There are rumors of an engagement to the Duke of Savoy. Is there room for romance in the D'Amato Empire?" Eliana laughed, a sound that was both charming and dismissive. She turned away, her silver dress catching the light. "I'm married to my work, and I've never been happier." Lucas pressed the power button. The screen went black, plunging the room into silence. He sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. He wasn't rich. He would never be rich again. But he was solvent. He paid his bills on time. He had friends at the factory, real friends, Guys like Miller and the new kid, Hernandez, who liked him for his terrible jokes and his willingness to take the extra shift, not his last name. He stood up, his knees popping a reminder of the 12-hour shifts on the concrete floor. He walked to the small kitchen to prepare his lunch for tomorrow. Beatrice had passed away 2 years ago. The end had been quiet, a stark contrast to the noisy, demanding life she had led. Eliana had sent Flowers massive white lilies that filled the small hospital room with a cloying sweetness. But she didn't attend the service. Lucas hadn't expected her to. He had stood by the grave alone, finally free of the voice that had dictated his every failure. He opened the fridge and took out a loaf of bread and a jar of mustard. As he spread the condiment on the slice, his movements methodical and practiced, he thought about the woman in the silver dress. He thought about the life he could have had if he had just been kind. If he had just looked at the woman across the breakfast table 5 years ago and seen her heart instead of her hemline. If he had been strong enough to tell his mother, no. He had lost $1 billion. He had lost the estate, the cars, the prestige. He was a shift supervisor at a factory his father had once owned but never visited. But as he put the sandwich into a plastic container, Lucas realized something strange, a feeling that had been creeping up on him for months, settling into his bones like the winter chill. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. Eliana had destroyed him. Yes, she had stripped him down to the studs. But in the wreckage of Lucas Harrington, the prince, he had finally found Lucas, the man. A man who knew the value of $1 because he had earned it. A man who knew the names of the people he worked with. A man who could sleep at night. He walked to the window and looked out at the streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement of New Haven. It wasn't the view of the Long Island Sound he had grown up with, but it was real. "Good for you, Eliana," he whispered into the empty room, his voice devoid of malice. "Good for you." He turned off the kitchen light, leaving the darkness to settle around him, comfortable and familiar. Tomorrow was an early shift. The machines needed maintenance, and for the first time in his life, Lucas Harrington was exactly where he was supposed to be. And that is how the Harrington legacy truly ended, not with a bang, but with a signature on a $1 contract. Lucas Harrington learned the hardest lesson of all true wealth isn't what you have in the bank. It's who you have in your corner. He traded a diamond for a stone because he couldn't tell the difference. And by the time he realized his mistake, the diamond was running the world. What do you think? Did Eliana go too far by taking everything? Or did Lucas deserve every bit of his downfall to find his humanity? Was his redemption as a shift supervisor enough? Or should he have suffered more? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear your take on this twisted tale of karma. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells us you want more stories like this. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. We have a crazy tale coming up next week about a lottery winner who hid his ticket from his greedy family for 10 years. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.